Yeah, good morning. It's day 7 here, lockdown in New Zealand. We're looking at some interesting facts on what's called the R naught value.
The hepatitis B and C and HIV are famously sexually and serum transmitted. So they're transmitted by body fluids. So they're transmitted by cervical secretions in sperm, in the seminal fluid at least. And hepatitis B and C are often transmitted through sharing dirty needles amongst intravenous drug users. Or appallingly, I'm sad to tell you, there are many cases where these diseases have been spread by bad quality, negligent healthcare. So the mode of transmission there is going to be a big factor in the R naught as well. Let's give some concrete examples of this so we can see how this really relates to practical epidemiology and preventing the spread of infections. So seasonal influenza is a droplet infection. The virus goes into the droplets that someone is breathing, coughing or sneezing out. And the R naught varies depending on the virus because there's a slightly different version of the virus, usually influenza A that's causing seasonal influenza. And the virus varies from year to year, so the R naught is typically 0.9, which is good, which means we'll have a very limited outbreak, or it can be as high as 2.1. So sort of 1.6 is probably typical for seasonal influenza. Now the 2009 swine flu outbreak that you might remember, that was an H1N1 influenza virus. Droplet infection and the R naught there was in that kind of range, about 1.5. People were infected on average from each infected person. And this is reasonably accurate because this was worked out after the event, where you can examine how the infection increased in prevalence quite accurately by looking back at the data. Hepatitis C is spread in body fluids, and the practical R naught there is about 2, largely because it's spread through intravenous drug users. Hepatitis B and HIV. Hepatitis B is probably similar, although hepatitis B is more transmissible than C sometimes. It's a separate topic. Right, Ebola. Hepatitis B is much more transmissible than HIV as well. Ebola, body fluids, the R naught was 2. Trouble with Ebola is the case fatality rate was so frighteningly high, so the consequences of getting that disease were really quite serious. Now, the 1918 influenza pandemic, 1918-1919 influenza pandemic, spread around the world and killed 50 to 100 million people. It was a quite appalling outbreak. And that was it was influenza A, it was an H1N1 influenza virus actually. And that killed between, the R naught there, the rate of spread, it killed an awful lot of people, but the rate of spread was 1.4 to 2.8. So probably figures around about 2.2 are typically quoted for that. So again, a high R naught, partly explaining why this was a pandemic and spread around the world. HIV, spread in body fluids, that's got a high R naught, but that's largely because of behaviour. People often having multiple sexual partners, or because of people sharing multiple needles amongst intravenous drug users. Now, smallpox, a wretched scourge of the past that's now thankfully been eradicated from the world. That was a droplet infection with a high R naught, quite a transmissible condition. Mumps, which is infective parasitis, droplet infection, between 4 and 7 R naught, so quite high. Pertussis, German measles, the R naught there's 5.5, quite high. But then one of the most infectious diseases around is measles, which is airborne, droplet and airborne. And the R naught there can be up to 18. Figures of 12 to 18 are typically reported there. Now, having said that, there's a phenomena called super spreaders. Because remember, this R naught figure is actually an average. So really, we're only going to know the R naught at the end of an outbreak, at the end of an epidemic or the end of a pandemic, looking back, looking at the growth of the infection, and seeing on average how many people were infected by an individual, on average. But the way this actually works in the real world is that some people are super spreaders. And I suppose you could say the converse of that is some people are mini spreaders. And this is often, in many pandemics and outbreaks, this has followed what we call the 20-80 rule. And this means that 20% of infected individuals are responsible for 80% of the transmission. So this 20% with the initial infection results in 80% of the new infections. These people are super spreaders. So whereas the 80% is only infecting 20%, isn't it? So the 80% is only infecting 20% of the new cases. So the problem can be these super spreaders, and identifying these super spreaders is a big challenge for epidemiologists. But if we cannot find them, isolate them, we're going to reduce the spread of an infectious disease. So pretty crucial that we test people to find out who these super spreaders are. Now, the biological reasons behind super spreaders is not particularly well understood. It might be partly genetics. It might be that they've had a large dose of the virus. It might be that their immune system has sort of partly combated the virus, but not enough to eradicate it, and they carry on shedding the virus for longer. But for whatever reason, or it could be behavioural, of course. These could be very gregarious people. Or in the case of HIV, these could be very sexually active.
Yeah, these super spreaders, after this virus has been tramped down in their various countries and stuff, it means that's why they talk about 18 months, because, boy, you just... Anyway, tourism. Bruce Simpson wrote an article today and said, well, what are the jobs of the future? You know, tourism is out, so what are people going to be doing? So they're going to build some roads and some bridges and stuff like that. So here in South Waikato, there's a couple of places that I'd like to see roads through. And why can't we go down there with our pick and shovel and our, and our wheelbarrows? There's plenty of land that the council can lop up and put into areas of sections, and people can go down there and for 30 hours worth of work, they get a freehold section in South Waikato. We're not encouraging people to come from over the place. The other one is Lake Mamananui. Why don't we get people down there with their wheelbarrows and their dredges, and dig out Lake Mamananui? Now, I don't want to be criticised for giving examples where the spread of the virus will happen, but we're in a situation in a rural location where there is a possibility that the individuals here don't have the virus at all. Not one single one in the 12,000 have it. And technically, as long as they're not infected by someone coming through, like a truckie that fills up the petrol bowser at the BP and then puts it on the handle and touches the buttons when he pays for it, and then you come in next and pick it up, and then you're a super spreader and spread it through the 12,000. As long as that truckie doesn't pass it on or isn't driving as a super spreader, South Waikato can carry on isolated without having to visit people and stuff. So you can have a macro shutdown where once you know a town is okay with regards to having no virus, they can get on as normal as a town. But the thing's locked off and no one's allowed to travel between towns and stuff. And that's got to be well policed. But I'm just letting you know that's lifting the lid. And so what are we going to do in South Waikato? Well, let's get some roads in. For example, there's a road that I'd love to put in when you come from Pete's Panel and you want to cross there and to get into, I think it's Roslyn Street. That's right. So it's just a 5 metre bit of dug out and put a bit of concrete around and away you go. So rather than getting all these big companies that come in and, the Downers and the Turners and all that sort of stuff, why do we not get the picks and shovels and wheelbarrows and stuff and just have a good old, day with a pick and a shovel? We don't need all these big machineries. And people are earning, after 3 months worth of work doing some roading, you've got a freehold section. And then people start helping build on those and stuff. There's plenty of trees and that. They can be cut down and made into wood. So that's what I'm suggesting. So my point in New Zealand is let's go and have, a community board election. So let's find out who the shakers and movers are in the community. We had our electricity shares just quickly, and they were about $35 million. So I wrote into the council formal submission, and said, look, turn it into gold and silver and do microloans. Well, that money would now have gone up to $150 million because of the price of gold and silver going up way back then. But we've gone and spent it all on things like $5 million of knocking a toilet over and cutting some trees down in Leith Place. So that money's all completely gone. Now when we need it, and to have it circulate, it's not there. So we've got to organise ourselves to get back to getting the community going. And why don't we make it a goal of everyone in South Waikato being debt-free by the end of this period of time of 18 months, if you like. And everyone owning a freehold house and everyone having stuff and making stuff. So that's my question to you out there. Yes, we might go back to how it used to be, but I don't think there's tourism and all of those different things. And we've got to be able to do work which advances people. So why doesn't South Waikato come out like the Emirates, if you like, like everyone owns a Lamborghini and a house bus and everyone's built it, the guys that fix the trucks, right? So they could be making house buses and stuff. There's so much work to be done in South Waikato, and the skills and technology are here in the lathes. We've got electricity, we've got running water, we've got trees, we've got stuff to do our things. So that's my question to you. We've got arc welders, from my perspective, let's get on and have some vision, okay? That's my point.